The ships sat at their moorings, a silence blanketing the harbor and befalling these historic beauties. They were behind the times, old school one might say, but they might be needed one day, and so they waited for the call of duty. As months turned to years, which turned to decades, one by one they were struck off the list, becoming a dying breed in the military. This is the reserve ship. Welcome to Fast Facts Friday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. When we look at warships, oftentimes they are part of either an active fleet or a reserve fleet. But what is a reserve fleet? By definition, a reserve fleet is a collection of naval vessels of all types that are fully equipped for service but are not currently needed. So, they are either partially or fully decommissioned at this point. A reserve fleet is informally said to be in mothball or mothballed. They may also be colloquially referred to as ghost fleet, though this term in the 21st century does refer to an active shadow fleet of aged reserve fleet oil tankers returned to an active service in order to circumvent commodity sanctions. Reserve ships are held in reserve against a time when it may be necessary to call them back into service. Typically, they are tied up in backwater areas near naval bases or shipyards in order to speed the reactivation process. They might be modified for storage during this time, like having rust-prone areas sealed off or wrapped in plastic, or, in the case of sailing warships, the masts removed. These reserve ships typically have a minimal crew servicing it, known informally as a skeleton crew, just to keep the ship maintained. For example, bilge pumps need to be run regularly to reduce corrosion of their steel and to prevent the ships from foundering at their moorings. When a ship is placed into reserve status, the various parts and weapon systems that the ship uses are also placed in a storage facility, so that if the warship is reactivated, the proper spare parts and ammo are available. Like the ships, however, the stored parts and equipment must be properly maintained or they will also fall into disrepair, suffer metal corrosion, or in some cases just become obsolete and need to be replaced. Reserve ships wait in the wings for the next assignment. And our next assignment is due this Sunday. If you are enjoying this episode and want to hear more about ships, their careers, and their wrecks, check out our main show Shipwreck Sunday every Sunday night at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Alright, let's get more into reserve fleets. The British Reserve Fleet was a repository for British decommissioned warships lasting from about 1800 until 1960. The Royal Navy's Reserve Fleet was largely replaced by the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and the concept of standby squadron. The RFA provides logistical and operational support to the Royal Navy, ensuring they are supplied and supported by providing fuel, stores, and transport. The standby squadron, which is a smaller group of vessels kept in a state of readiness, could be rapidly deployed to replace ships needing repairs or refits. The United States National Defense Reserve Fleet consisted of about 50 World War II-era ships that were moored in Suisun Bay, also called the Suisun Bay Reserve Fleet, near San Francisco since the 1950s or 60s. The fleet included military cargo ships, troop ships, and tankers. As of mid-2021, there are just 2 ships anchored here. Additional NDRF vessels are moored at the fleet sites at Newport News, Virginia, also called the James River Reserve Fleet, the Beaumont Reserve Fleet at Beaumont, Texas, and at designated outported berths. In practice, most reserve ships quickly become obsolete and are scrapped, used for experiments, target practice, sold to other nations or occasionally to private companies for civilian conversion, become museum ships, or are sunk to become artificial reefs. USS Missouri is a popular example of an ex-warship turned museum ship, and she is massive. That's one I've actually seen in person and toured. As for artificial reefs, one of the most notable examples is USS Orskany, an aircraft carrier that was sunk off the coast of Florida to become the world's largest artificial reef. If you want to know more about artificial reefs, we have an episode of Fast Facts Friday that covers them. Alternatives to reserve fleets include exporting the vessels for shipbreaking or dismantling, which is just fancy wording for scrapping. We do have a video covering ship scrapping too if you are interested in the minutiae of that process. More recently, other than just scrapping, the U.S. Navy has established a program to allow ships, such as Oriskany, to be sunk in selected locations to create artificial reefs. Recycling, which is different than just simply scrapping, is yet another option, and warships that are recycled are stripped of their paint, cut into pieces, and then recycled. Steel from pre-nuclear age ships, either mothballed or sunk and raised, called low background steel, is used in experimental physics when the experiment requires shielding material which is itself only extremely weakly radioactive, emitting less than present-day background radiation. Materials which were manufactured after atmospheric nuclear explosions have taken place reflect the higher ambient level of radioactivity that fallout has caused. There are, of course, environmental concerns when it comes to reserve fleets. The practice of exporting and dismantling ships has caused international protests as they contain toxic materials, and they aren't always handled properly by the countries they are sent to. In 2007, following studies that found that 20 tons of lead paint had flaked off the ships of the NDRF, environmentalist groups sued to have them removed. The U.S. Federal Maritime Administration agreed to remove more than 50 of the ships as a result of this, 25 of which have been removed by 2012, and the remainder by the end of 2017. If you want to hear more about the environmental impact of ship scrapping, definitely check out our episode on it. We go much more in depth into that there. Reserve ships are a rare breed in today's market, especially with warfare largely taking to the skies. Not to say that navies are obsolete, because they certainly are not. However, air fleets are faster, cheaper, and can pack just as much of a punch, therefore becoming the face of large-scale military operations in the modern age. After a massive earthquake shook Japan, a battleship approached loaded to the brim with supplies, and those willing to help the survivors stood at the ready on the decks of the massive ship. Here, she was a beacon of hope, though in World War II, she'd be a cog in an imperialistic machine, meeting a dark end. On this week's episode of Shipwreck Sunday, we get into the story of Hyuga.